Thank you for everyone joining. Today we are doing our webinar on storing grades for the end of first semester and any quarter two classes. We're going to go through that in depth today. Let me start out with my preface that I always say we are using a sandbox server full of fake students and fake information. And so anything that you see on here is purely made up data on no real person at all. So any likeness to any person is purely coincidental. I do have the chat open so that if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to stick them in the chat and we'll answer them as they go along. So the key to understanding storing grades is understanding what kind of classes you have scheduled for each term length throughout the school year. One of the things that I've created that kind of helps us to understand how this grade storing goes, because these buckets are very mutually exclusive of each other when it comes to different class lengths. So I always tell people it's a good idea to kind of map out your year as you go along. And I provide this right here as kind of a template to use that we color code to note what grades we need to look at for each time of the year. So if y'all were with me during the quarter one storing grades webinar, you'll see that we went through when we looked at our year-long grades, we looked at our semester one grades and our quarter one grades and figured out which buckets were impacted during that term of quarter one, which were the dates from August to October. And now we're looking at quarter two as we get up on the holiday break. We know that we've got for schools that have semester classes, we might have to do things at the end of the semester. We might store grades at high schools who have block schedules. A lot of people still have year-long classes. So what do we do with those year-long classes at the end of them? And if you do any 9 weeks, quarter classes, or trimester, which I don't think we have anybody out there on trimester anymore, but if we do, where are you at in that and where we should be storing at? So I'm going to put this link in the chat, and I will send this link out with the recording just like I did with the quarter one. So this is in the chat for you so you can see it. And just as an FYI, if you ever go looking for this link on our Alabama website for PowerSchool, on the grading page, I do put this diagram on here so you can always refer to it here at any time along with our overview videos. So I'll actually update the Q2 storing video now that we're on the new UI here. Um, once we get the recording of this video out there. So if you ever go looking on the Alabama PowerSchool site, the grading page does have these recordings of the videos and does have this document that you'll want to use as well. So let's think about our buckets. Let's think about our term lengths. Because when you think about your pyramid of your final grade reporting terms and your years and terms that you created for your school, those years and terms are basically boxes that you have put courses in. So for example, in my years and terms in my little made up school here, I have year-long classes. So that 25, 26 in that top row, think of it as a box. All of my year-long classes are sitting over here in this box. So let's say, I don't know, PE is an all year class. Maybe it's an alternating class that goes all year. Then it's sitting over here in this box. I also have years and terms that are semester classes. So that means I have two boxes over here where one box is semester one and are all of those classes that start in August and end in December. Then I got another box over here that are my semester two classes that'll start up in January and will end in May. So anything that is a semester class, so let's say it's an English, maybe I scheduled my English classes first semester, they're sitting over here in this box. Now, what is very interesting about this and is the hardest part to wrap our head around when we're working in PowerSchool is that when you have these classes like this English, that's a semester one class, and you have this year-long class that is a PE class over here, when it comes to storing grades, they don't touch each other. The Q1 over in this class is not the Q1 that's over in this class. So when you store for this year-long class Q1, it does not touch the Q1 that's over here in this semester class, which is why we have to do this kind of multi-layered approach in the actual stored grades page. So it's very important that you understand that every one of these boxes of courses are not in any how intertwined with each other other than they have the same naming conventions of these buckets. But when you store grades for one, it in no way impacts grades in those other buckets whatsoever. We have found districts in the past that have forgotten to store grades for one of the buckets for one of these other layers of classes like a quarter class because they thought when they stored, Q2 for 25, 26, it stored for all Q2s anywhere inside of 25-26 through any course, but it's only for those that were scheduled in the 25-26 term. So it didn't touch semester 1, it did not touch quarter 2. And so we have to make sure that you're going through all of those. So let's think about this time frame of where we're at. So we're in December. Now, I do realize a lot of districts are not going to store their semester 1 grades until after Christmas. Like, I'll give time for the teachers to verify grades at the end of the semester, and then maybe have a work day or something in January that they do, and then you store after that. Completely get that, and that's okay. I wanted to go ahead and do this webinar early so that y'all would have time to kind of process, ask questions, and get ready for that. And we'll have the recording so you can play it back. So let's say that we're here at the end of December. Most of you are getting out, the 19th. So I actually have my semester 1 ending on 12/19 to mimic what a lot of the districts are doing. So what would be involved in those kind of grades? Well, we know that at the end of second quarter, we're dealing with quarter 2 grades and then possibly semester averages. So if I look at my different terms, I'm going to take them box by box. I've got to decide what of these buckets are being impacted that I need to grab right now. So if I look at my year-long classes, the buckets that I have created are Q1, 2, 3, 4, which I expect to be my quarter grades for first, second, third, fourth quarter. I have an X1 and an X2, which in my setup is an exam. So an X1 means I'm given a kind of midterm at the end of December and then given a final at the end of May. And I've got percentages set on those. And then I've got an F1. So that's going to be the final overall course grade. Now, I do realize that some of y'all even do some S1s and S2s because you like to get semester averages, and then your F1 is the average of the 2 semesters. So if you have an S1 or S2 in here, you just need to take that into account and how your graph looks when you do your highlights. For me, and the way that I set this up, I did it as 20, 20, 20, 20, 10, 10. And so I didn't do averages of averages. I just used all the, well, I did do averages of averages, if you would say that, but not of the semesters. So I just cut the math on it. Districts do it different ways. So what would I be using here in December? Well, I know it would be the end of my quarter 2 grade, so I'll expect to do a quarter 2 posting. And I do expect to give that midterm, which is that X1, at the end of December for the first half of those year-long classes. So as far as my year-long class is concerned, I am only going to be storing X1 and Q2 in my second quarter. Okay, so X2 and Q1. Now, are those credit-bearing grades inside of a year-long class? For me, that answer is no, because I do not give credit until the course is over in my setup. So that's only going to come with an F1, which I'm not at the F1 time inside of 25-26. Now, there are some districts out there that have an F1 and an F2 in their year-long class, and that's okay. The reason that they're doing that is because instead of awarding credit all at the end of the course, so if this was that year-long PE that gets the 1 credit at the end, instead they award it on halves. So they give half credit at the end of first semester and a half credit at the end of second semester of the year-long class. So they have actually built an F1 and an F2 up here. We'll talk about how you will store that F1 and F2, and they will receive credit. So it is very possible that in this one right here, I just realized I messed my colors up on this. We'll get those fixed. That you could have quarter 2, possibly an exam, and you could have an F1 over here for half credit if you are a district that awards half credit now, half credit later. Okay. Now let's look at our semester courses. For my semester 1 courses, those will be the courses that end here in December. Maybe it's, a government econ or something like that you do on halves. In this case, at quarter 2, I would expect to have an end of quarter grade. I do give a final in here, so I've got an X1 in here. You may give a final, you may not, so you might not even have any X grades in here. Some of your elementaries have no X grades. You might just be posting quarter 2. But because it is the end of a course, this semester course wraps up in December, I am going to have some final grades that I'm going to issue credit to inside of that semester 1 class. So when I look at the setup of what I'm going to store without credit and with credit, for my setup, quarter 2 is not a credit bearing for me. X1 is not a credit bearing for me, so they're going to be stored without credit. The F1, however, is the credit bearing because it's actually going to be an average of this. Maybe it's, an 80-20 split of that or something. That's going to get stored and it's going to be awarded credit because whatever courses I was taking in this first semester are done, finished, finalized. They're going to get the credit. And again, this is for high school for credit bearing. If you were a middle school that doesn't award credit, if you're an elementary school that doesn't award credit, but you have a semester class, then you would just store that F1 to be the final grade, but no credit associated with it. No big deal. Quarter two. So if I do have even lower tiers of classes, so classes that are shorter length, in this case, maybe I have some 9 weeks classes. Maybe I'm on a block schedule at a high school and I do 9 weeks courses in my government econ, or maybe health courses are down here. Well, if that's the case, then I'm looking at these that are these quarter two classes that started in October and end in December. In that case, I set up the buckets Q2, X1, and F1. So it kind of mimics the semester grades. I just don't have a quarter one grade. So I've got the quarter average, an exam, and then a final that's going to be an average of those quarters and exams. Now, there are some districts that do not have any of this Q2 and X1. They might just have an F1, like just all the grades are going to go together on whatever weighted percentages you have to get an F1 grade, and that's perfectly okay as well. Because again, this is a course that is ending and stops, and they will go to another course in the 9-week rotation starting next quarter. So if you do have these smaller buckets of Q2 and an X1, then they're going to be stored, but no credit associated, and the F1 will be stored with credit to be that final grade that you're going to award the credit to inside of that quarter two class. If all you have is an F1, then you won't have an X1 or Q2 to store in those. You will just have that F1. So when I look at all the different buckets I created and which bucket lives inside of each one of these terms, then this tells me right here that I've got to touch 3 different passes of this. I'm going to have to store for Q2 grades. I'm going to have to store for X1 grades, and I'm going to have to store for F1 grades. So that means we're going to have to run that store grade 3 times because you must run it each time for a new bucket. And then this is going to help us figure out that little chart that we have to do on there. So we'll refer to this back and forth. So now that we kind of understand how those buckets are independent of each other and thinking about what's going to get, credit and what's not going to get credit this time around, let's go to the stored grades page. Now, I want to start out with making sure everybody remembers this kind of fallacy inside of PowerSchool. Inside of PowerTeacher Pro, and let me pop over in here right quick. When the teachers are on the grading page for traditional grades, there is this little button down here that says final grade status. That's like the indicator to say, yes, I've got all my grades in, I'm done. For those of us who came over from the iNow years, we had that where they had to kind of go in and finalize their grades, and then we posted the grades, and you couldn't post without it being finalized. That is not how it works inside of PowerSchool. Even if you set up the rules inside of your district that says teachers must click this final grade status to say, yes, grades are complete, they check the box, they hit save, and you go run that final grade status report inside of SIS, you can still store grades. That does not have to be done in order for grades to store. Because when it comes to storing grades in PowerSchool, what's going to happen is this computer program is going to look inside these teacher grade books. And whatever is inside of these teacher grade books at the moment you hit store is what's going to that historical record. So you can either instruct them to do this so that you're getting some kind of confirmation that the teachers are doing what you've asked them to do, or you can just give them a deadline and say, guys, I'm storing grades on XYZ, and whatever you've got in your grade book is going to be pulled on that time. Make sure it's right. And again, you want to make sure that you lock the grade book before you store grades so that they can't get in there and make any changes once you store and you get out of sync grades between, what's showing to the parents over in the web portal or in the app versus what you're sending home on a report card. So hopefully everybody has got their lock grading reporting terms set up. We talked about those heavily in the Q1 story, so that your teachers right now probably are seeing some little message like this that says, hey, for Q2, grades and scores can be entered into midnight on 12/21. So if I give them 2 days after the end of the term and my term ends on the 19th, then that means this grade book is going to lock at midnight on the 21st. So I'm then on the 22nd going to be able to store grades because everybody's locked down and can't make any changes to any grades that their students have. So you want to make sure that you've got your kind of ducks in a row as to what you've instructed the teachers to do as their deadline, when you're actually going to lock this grade book, and when you're going to store. Now, do I absolutely know that when you tell teachers, hey, you've got to have this in by 12/21, that somebody's going to come in on the 22nd and go, I forgot, and you're going to have to go back and restore for them? Absolutely, we know that happens. And there are ways to unlock that individual section for you to go in and then store for just that one class if need be. And we'll talk about that on the stored grades page. So when you are ready to store, when you've got all of that set up, your teachers have finalized grades, whether you tell them to or not. It does not have to be part of the process. If you're just like, not even going to fool with checking that, I'm just going to tell everybody and then we're going to pull them. I can come in here, and remember, you must be at the school level. This is done at a school level, not at the district level. And under school management, academics is the store grades page. So again, you're only going to see that if you have the security permissions to this page. And it's a big page that really we do not have to fill out a lot of this. So I tell people, don't get intimidated by this page. So the first thing that you're going to do is tell it which bucket we are wanting to store for. So remember, we looked at our little diagram and we've decided that because we're at the end of second quarter, we're at the end of first semester, the buckets that are getting touched during this time frame are Q2s, X1s, and F1s. Okay, now again, you might have some more buckets depending on other grades that you get in here, but you've got your list of them right here. So these are the store codes I've got to go for. So I'm going to start out with my quarter grades. So this first section up here, which grades? Use this final grade reporting term. Which bucket am I going to go from the teacher's grade book to pick up? So I'm going to choose Q2, and it's going to give you a drop-down list from your final grade reporting terms that you have set up. It's only going to show you the buckets that you have created. So Q2. Notice you don't get a drop down here on this one because this says, okay, I'm going to go into the teacher grade book and go get that bucket of Q2. But what do you want to store it as over inside of the historical grades page for the kiddos? So let me go to Mickey right quick. Ooh, let's put an M instead of a comma there. Let's go to Mickey and go to his historical grades. And see, here I have these right here. Okay. These names right here are not automatically the same buckets as what you created in that final grade reporting term. Here is where you tell it what to store it as. And I've seen people kind of ignore this and leave it defaulted. And I could, if the program would let me do this, it would let me take Q2 and store them as Q1, which you know would be a nightmare because you would just overwrite your Q1 grade that you stored last 9 weeks. You don't want to do that. You have to make sure that you type in. I mean, if I wanted to go like real crazy, I could take the bucket Q2 and store it as MZ if I wanted to. I don't know why I would do something like that. I highly discourage it, but you could. There are times I have seen people where they would take like a Q2 grade and store it again as an F1 because they wanted just the parents to see that Q2 and F1 in a 9 weeks grade is the same thing. You can absolutely do that. You can store it in different ways. I've seen people take grades and store them as a separate bucket because they use it for something very specific for GPAs and class ranking. I see that happen at the end of quarter 3 a lot. When they're like, I need a GPA that's going to give me this, it needs to use, the final grade F1s, but it needs to use the quarter grade of this. And so they will use some unique naming conventions. They don't put it as a bucket for the teachers, but they'll take one of the buckets that exists and store it as the bucket and as something else to use it. So that does happen at times. Summer, I'm struggling with this part. Every time I store, I get an alert saying I can't store because I've already stored. If I need to change something in Restore, Blake and I have to call PowerSchool and have them delete the previous store before it will allow me to store again. Okay, yeah, that shouldn't happen because you can restore over and over again as many times as you want. I've never seen an alert, so if you will let me know next time you get that alert, Summer, we can walk through it together and make sure that the steps are going in the right order. Because I've restored, yeah, multiple times. Now, I will say when you store, you want to make sure you use the exact same parameters. And when I get this screen set up, I will encourage y'all to kind of take a screenshot of this screen, because if y'all ever email me and say, hey, something didn't go right, I kind of have to see how you set the screen up to figure out what went wrong and where we might have to go to correct it. So the first thing you do is figure out what grade bucket to go get out of the teacher grade book, and then what grade bucket do you want to store it as over in historical grades. So right now I'm starting with Q2. I want to take the Q2 grades out of the teacher grade book, and I want to put them over on this kid's historical grades page as a Q2 grade. Okay. So like right here, for my advanced conditioning for, I'm trying to think what else I've got him in right now. I want to make sure that I have that grade over here. If I have grades in the class form, let's hope I do. Now, the next part, very important. Very, very important for this part right here. Exclude and include class enrollments. And I talked about this very heavily on that first 9 weeks grading one. You must fill something out here. A lot of times I see people that will kind of glaze over this section right here. They don't choose anything. And when they store grades, guys, it's going to store every grade for every class a kid has ever been in for any of these links that you talk to down here. That even means if a kid was enrolled in a class for one day, withdrew them out the next day, but during that one day, the teacher gave them 100 for bringing a syllabus in, that kid's going to get 100. And now the other class that they were in for the whole, semester or whatever, that they got a 75 in, now you got 100 posted and a 75 posted, 2 grades, and you don't know which one is right. And you have to manually go correct those. This is where you tell PowerSchool which of those enrollment records on kids you want it to actually store. Because I guarantee you have dropped courses on some kid at some point in time during this year, plus you've enrolled kids at various points in times throughout the year in these classes. If you find me one school who has not dropped at least one class on a kid, I'd like buy the whole school lunch or something, because it just doesn't happen. We have to change schedules on kids. It's part of the process. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want those classes that you had to drop to move them into the new ones to post as long as along with the new classes that they're in. You only want that current class to be the one that goes in there. So we have 3 different ways that we can cull these down. You can either choose this first one. Exclude enrollment records where the student enrolled in the class after this date. So if you're like, hey, I want to get everybody except those that enrolled after XYZ. Well, that one, you could use it, but it's not the best one to use for us. The next one is exclude enrollment records where the student dropped the class before this day. So I could say, well, I want to store for everybody except for those that I dropped the class on or before, the first or second week of the class. Well, that's great, but what about the kids that dropped the class, even later? So that one's not the best one to use either, in my opinion. The one that we have typically used that mimics pretty much what we did when we were back in our I days and have been doing in Alabama for 20 years is really this last one. Include only enrollment records that are currently active and that were active on this date. So it's kids where they are in the class right now and were in the class as of this date. What has always typically been my advice, and you can take it or you can adjust it, is to take your end of your 9 weeks, back that up 4 days. Just because I know at the end of the terms, and that sometimes our counselors will start dropping classes to start moving kids around for next semester. So if anybody happens to drop like on the last day of the term, we still want that kid's grade to get stored. So to give the counselors a little bit of leeway at the end of that semester for any class changes they're making for the next semester or next quarter, always back it up 4 days. This means that any kid who was dropped way prior to that, their grades are not going to get stored. Now you got to think about that. If you had a kid like one random that, I don't know, withdrew 1 week ago, then you might have to store them separately. I would store them when they withdraw, as a matter of fact, something like that, just so I get those grades in, because you're like, yep, they still completed. We're going to store whatever grade they have at this point in time. Completely y'all's choice on that, but you do have to think about those onesies and twosies that don't fit in the overall general rule. So I'm going to say include only enrollment records that are currently active and were active as of. So if my term ends the 19th and I back it up 4 days, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to store on the 16th. It is very important you be consistent in that date. Write it down somewhere. Keep a little sticky, like I would keep a sticky note on my computer of my date that I use for every one of my storing. If you're the data clerk that deals with grades, deals with transcripts, deals with storing grades, you want to know this date for every one of your quarters, because if you ever have to go back later in the year and store again for that quarter, you've got to use that exact same date, or else you could end up duplicating your data, and that's a mess to get cleaned up. Now, these additional filters. You can store for the whole school, which is what we typically do inside of here. However, if you needed to store just for a specific student, if you needed to store for a specific course and section because that one teacher came to you after the fact and said, I forgot to put this grade in, can you unlock the grade book so I can put this test in and it recalculate and lock it back? Then you could come and say, all right, I need to store just for this one teacher's course and section, and it just restores for those kids and won't duplicate. It'll just overwrite the grade that was in historical grades. I can store by grade level. So if you want to take it, a little at a time and say, hey, I just want to store ninth grade right now. Then I'm going to go store 10th grade. Then I'm going to go store 11th grade, or I'm going to store second grade, and then I'm going to store third grade. However you're going to do it. This comes in real handy at the end of the year in May, and we'll have it as part of that webinar, when you need to store seniors' grades ahead of everybody else because they finish up early and you're trying to get graduation statuses finalized. You can store them and then go back and sort everybody else. You can store students by tracks. I don't know really that many of us use the tracks inside of here, but if you did, you could store for tracks, or you could look at specific exit dates and say, hey, anybody that withdrew from this date to this date, store their grades. So there are filtering options, but we're not going to take advantage of any of them here because I'm just going to store for the whole school. This is where I'm going to kind of go through, and then I have to use the others when I have to fix something for a kid or for a section, because I would not restore the whole school when you're fixing something for a small group. I would use these additional filters. Classes by term length. So this is going to tell me which one of my terms. So I have the 2025, the 25-26 term, semester 1 term, semester 2 term, quarter 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So 7 terms I have created in my instance. It's going to tell me which of these terms are active in the time frame as of today's date when I'm storing. Now, it doesn't mean that if something happened to Q1 and I just realized that, notice quarter 1 is not in this list, but I realized, oh no, I forgot to store quarter 1 for my 9 weeks courses. Can I go back and do it? If I click this little yes button, it shows me the whole year. So I can see the whole year. Typically, it only displays what is for right there in this moment in time as of today's date. I think it's like a 30-day window or something that it stays in there until you can, it kind of hides it off and you have to hit this yes to go back and see it. Very nice. Like that right there is a gem. So it tells me that these are the only links I need to use, which is very interesting because that's also the same ones that I have listed in my little diagram right here, because these are the ones that have active buckets for this moment in time. So I need to decide, what am I doing for these links? Now remember, I'm only looking at one bucket. I'm looking at Q2. So I've got to decide in this column, do I not want to touch the bucket at all? In other words, it's going to bypass it and not do anything with the grades. Or do I want to store them and give them credit, or store them but give them no credit inside of here? So looking at my year-long classes for Q2, year-long classes, Q2, do I want to store them? Yes. Do I want to give them credit? No. So that means I'm going to choose store with no credit. Now look at my semester 1 classes. Again, same bucket, Q2. Do I want to store them? So is Q2 getting stored in my semester 1 classes? Absolutely. I've got a Q2 that I need a grade for. Do I need it to have credit? Absolutely not. It's not the final grade. So I do want to store it, but store it with no credit. What about my quarter 2 length classes? So I'm going to come down here, and that's going to be these classes right here, my little final grades pyramid in my years and terms. Am I going to have a quarter 2 in that one? Absolutely I am. So I do want to store it. Is it going to get credit? Absolutely not, because it's not the final grade, the F1 is. So this is also going to be store, but it's going to be a store with no credit. So now I have the Q2. I've set the date, not doing anything with filters. And I do realize I need to store it for every one of the boxes of classes, but they're not going to get any credit. Now, here's the question of, do you have kids that have classes at other schools in your district? So do you have, and this is only for your district, not for Cross LEA, this is remote kids. If I'm at a high school and maybe I've got some kids that are enrolled in an alternative school, or a middle school kid who's enrolled in band at the high school or something like that, when I store the grades, do I want to also include the grades at all those other schools that they're at and go ahead and store them as well? Or do I want to only store for this school because the other schools are going to store their grades as well? Well, that's where y'all got to know what you're doing in the district, and y'all need to have a plan. You don't both want to store. You either want to say, okay, I'm going to store just for the classes at this school. But maybe the Career Tech Center that my kid is going to, they're doing their own storing. So those grades will come in when they do their storing. I'm not going to store because I don't know if they're finished. If that's the case, then I'm going to choose this school only. But if your district's like, nope, nobody at the Career Tech Center is going to store, they've all been given the same date to have their grades done by. So when you store for your kids at the high school, then you're going to store for classes they have all around the district. So you're going to pick all schools. So you need to know who is doing the storing if you have remote enrolled students within your district. Now, if you have cross enrolled students, so for example, you've got kids who are at your high school and they're going to a career tech center in another district, then you either have to have the grade pass back turned on, and if you do, when they store their grades, they will come back. And yes, it will work, as we fixed that little Friday glitch that happened on first quarter. Or if it's turned off, they're going to have to send you a file, and you're going to have to manually either import or enter the grades on those students' records. So you'll have to know about that with Cross LEA. I have not heard when Access is doing their storing yet. So when it is, there'll be an email that'll be sent out, so you'll know when to expect those Cross LEA grades. For this, I'm going to say only store for this school. Now, when you do choose the all schools, one thing you want to keep in mind is, what is the record of the school name? So what school do you want it stored as? So if I am storing for all schools and I got a kid over here at XYZ school as well, when I pull that grade back to their transcript, do I want it to be called my Alabama high school grade, or do I want it to be called XYZ school grade? Be very conscientious of that, especially for your kids who are your D1 kids, for athletic eligibility with the clearinghouse, because you know you have to have specific sites designated for that. So if you got kids over here in this, just because the class is located over there, but it's really your high school class, just be careful what you're naming it as. That's all I'm going to say on that one. This school only is, so I'm just going to post for whatever grades are at Alabama High School. When it comes to all this down here, we're not going to use it. Don't need it for what we do in Alabama. So even though this is a really big screen, there's really 3 sections you've got to work with. What bucket are you using? What do you want to include the grades as of what date? And how are you dealing with this terms right here? Once you figure out those 3, this is going to go by quickly. So it took me a minute to explain this screen, but when we store those others, it's going to go really, really fast. So now I'm going to hit my submit button. And it's going to start the storing process. And we're going to wait on it. We'll take a sip. So it told me, of my 1,500 students that I have enrolled in here, 0 grades were updated. Well, that's great, because I haven't stored anything yet. So nothing should have been updated in a Q2, because there were no Q2 grades yet. It told me 7,328 grades were inserted. Yes, I have grades in my pilot sandbox, because sometimes I don't. And I am complete. So that means if I go look at my kiddos, let's see if Mickey Extra has any grades. If not, I'll go pick a kid that's in that class that I know I have a grade on. I can see, yep, he didn't have any grades, but I do see now the little null grades inside of here. So if I were to go, let me go back in here. Who's a kiddo? Mr. Anderson. Let's find little Mr. Anderson over here, because he had a grade in that class that I was just in. And so now I will see he had a Q1 grade. He had a Q2 grade. And so now I have that grade inside of Q2 for this class. Okay. So now let me just pop back in there real quick. Let me go to my all reporting terms because I'm going to take Mr. Bentley right here and I'm going to throw in an exam grade. Let's just say that he made an 88 so that I can save because I want to be able to throw that in as well. So yeah, I'm in F1 now. All right, that's my first pass. So remember I told you we've got to pass that page for every bucket that we're going to store. So I have just completed my X2. So like if you had this printed out on your screen, you could mark through those, not X2, excuse me, Q2s, they're done. So what's the next bucket that I need to work with? I need to go and do any exam grades. Some of your years might have exam grades, some might not. So if I have exams in year long and semester but don't in quarter two, that's okay. You just make sure you adjust for that when you're filling out the screen. So I'm going to go back to the stored grades page and we're going to change. What bucket do we want to work with now? All right, well, this time I want to work with my exams, my X1. So this is the bucket I'm going to go pull out of that teacher grade book. So like that X1 that I just put on Mr. Bentley. And then what do I want to store it as? Well, I want to store it as an X1 because most of the time they're going to be the same thing. Include, exclude. Guys, you want to use the same date you just did and you want to use the same parameters. So I want to include, back it up 4 days, means I'm going to use the 16th. So now let's think about that. Do I want to store it, not store it? And if I store it, is it going to get credit or not? So for an X1, am I going to have X1s in my year-long class? Yes. Is it going to get credit? No. So I'm going to put store with no credit. Do I have X1s in my semester classes? Yes, I give finals in that semester class as well. And so I'm going to say store, but it does not get credit. Do I give a final in this Q2 class? So because I have it in here, I'm going to say yes. But if you didn't have one, so let's just say all you had in Q2 was an F1 grade, you just let it all go in there because maybe they had their own category of a final exam or something. You could just say, nope, I don't have an X1, so I'm going to say do not store. If you do not have a bucket for it in your little diagram, you just leave do not store there. But in my case, I did have one, so I'm going to store, but it is not credit bearing, so store with no credit. And all honesty, when you're storing for your elementary schools and your middle schools, you're pretty much always storing with no credit. It's really only the high schools that have to deal with this credit, non-credit thing, unless you're some of those 8th graders that have like the algebra. I don't know, do we still do algebra 1 that has credit or Spanish that has credit? Sometimes the foreign languages, you would have to worry about those. All these are stored with no credit though. And again, do I want to store classes for this school only or for all schools? And again, I'm only storing for this school because every school in my district takes care of their own classes. So very easy setup. Takes me just a second to go through and go boom, 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 but I have to make sure that I reset this because if you hit that back button, this goes back to 0 and that's what bites us a lot of times. So please make sure you include this every time. So I'm going to store my X1 grades now. So when I hit submit here, it's going to run through. So I have my 1,500 students, no grades updated because I had no X1 grades stored at that point. And it inserted 7,328 grades. Now, when it says it inserted something, that also includes your nulls. So even if a class didn't have it in there, like a grade in there, it's still going to put that null value and it shows that it did insert something. It will be less if you put do not store on some than what you did in that first one. So if I look at Mr. Anderson, remember I did not have that X1 grade. If I refresh his page, remember I gave him an 88. Look at there. There is my 88 that is inside of there. So you see those come in and you can always check on a student to make sure that it comes in with those. So now looking back at my diagram, the only thing that I have left to store is I have this F1. Now this one is going to be where I'm going to get some splits of some do not stores and some stores because I don't want to store F1 for my year-long class yet. Okay, because it's not over to the end of the year. So I'm going to go back to my stored grades screen, go back on stored grades. What bucket do I want to store for? I want to store for F1. I want to call it F1. I'm going to use that same setup, so check that same box and use that same date of the 16th. So which one of the layers of terms do I want to store for? For my year-long classes, do I want to store F1? In my case, the answer is no. I'm going to leave it do not store because my F1 does not happen until the end of the year. But let's pretend you are on a half and half district. Is there anybody on the call that y'all store and you give half credit at the end of December and the other half at May? Because if so, here's what you would do. If you have a stored grade screen that the year long has an F1 and an F2 because you award on half and half, then you would say, yes, I do want to store. I am going to give credit, but I'm only going to give 50% of the credit. So that's my year-long class. So if your class is a 1 credit class and you put that 50% in, it knows to store 0.5 in December, and you'll do the same thing in May and say store with credit for only 50%. So if you are the district that does, an F1 and an F2, and you have it in that full length class, then you will do that at that 50%. I, however, do not have it, so I'm going to go back to do not store for my setup. But let's look at semester 1. Do I have the F1 grade in semester 1? Absolutely. This is my class that ends in December right here. So yes, I want that one to be stored. So I'm going to store, but this time it is the end of that course. It is going to get credit, and I must tell it how much credit to give. I want to give it 100% of the credit. So if it's a half credit course, it gets half credit. If it's a whole credit course, it's going to get the whole credit. I mean, a 1 credit course, it's going to get 1. And if it's a half credit course, it's going to get half. Quarter 2, same thing. Do I have an F1? Absolutely, I have an F1 because I've got it, combining the averages of this Q2 and the X1. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to store. And again, it is the end of that quarter 2 class. This is my final grade. So I'm going to say store with credit, again, at 100%. So I'm wrapping up the semester 1 and quarter 2 courses, because when we come back in January, we will be looking at any semester course that is in semester 2, and we will be in any quarter 3 9 weeks courses. They will swap. Same thing for these settings here, and I'm going to store for this school only. So now that I have everything set like I need, I hit submit. Casey, do we put 0.5 for the percent credit awarded or 50% if the driver's ed is a 0.5 credit course? No, Casey, because you've got the course set up to store a half a credit. So if you were to say 50%, it would only store a 0.25 credit and not the half credit. We in Alabama take care of our halves and wholes in the credits assigned to the course. So when you finish that course, say you want to give it 100% of the course. The only time that you would want to split and make this page be anything other than 100 is if you have a class that keeps continuing on and you're only given part of the credit for the course now and the other part of the course credit later. Does that make sense for you? Perfect. Katie, let's see, do we have to store X1 or is it calculated into F1? So, depending on your final grade calculation, I'm assuming, Katie, you probably have a traditional grades formula that has F1 being included, like maybe it's an 80-20 split or something like that, 40-40-20 Q1, Q2, X1. It's going to still be calculated in X1. Whether you store it to show that grade to parents or not is completely up to you. There are some districts that don't even make a bucket as an X1. Some of them will create it as a category inside of the final, I keep saying final, traditional grade setup, so that it's calculated in the overall grade of F1, and they never see it as an individual bucket. They see it as an assignment for the student. It's up to you how you do it. So it could actually go either way. I do know there are some districts that do not store the X1s. That's your call. Just make sure that you know that you can go back if a parent questions what that grade is. They can still see them over in Power Teacher Pro and know that it is being calculated in there. But because we've had districts that have forgotten to store grades before, we know it's perfectly okay to keep continuing on and never store grades. It's just not advised. I would always store just to have it there as a record. And so guys, that's us storing our grades. And so I don't think I have anything on him that will do, because I didn't put any grades in these other classes. We do store our X1 so they display in historical as well. Yes, because most people want to be able to see these grades in here, and they also want to be able to see, when things have been changed, because what you don't want to happen is somebody to go in and change a grade over in Power Teacher Pro and it changed in F1 and you don't know why it changed, and not have it matching over here. So most people do store, exactly, Daniel. Most people do store those F1s, X1s and X2s just for that right there, and to keep that change history inside of there for grade changes that may have to take place in there. The other big debate, especially when it comes to those X grades, because did y'all notice what I did over here when I put that grade in for my kiddo? Oh, I don't want to go to score sheet. There's a debate on, do you have to put an assignment in here for that grade to go in? And that answer is no. I have a lot of districts that they don't put in an assignment. Instead, they tell the teachers, for your exams, just come over here to the all reporting grades term and just put in whatever average those kids or average, whatever the grade they made on that final. So this is, in this case, it's a year-long class. It's a midterm. I could put the whatever grade it is in there, and I'm just going to say, hey, guess what? Everybody else. Oh, I can't fill on this side. Can I? Can I fill on this one? I can't fill on this one. Ended up with a 95. That you could do it here and not have to work about it being an assignment and it being in the wrong date range. It's just this. Plus, it gives us that easy way to say, if a kiddo got that exemption and I needed to go to a code, I could just do that code grade inside of there if I needed to. And not use that little purple thing. We always have that little debate back and forth there. Recalculate. Go away. I don't want to exempt that now. So just keep in mind that all of those can be done through there. They don't have to be done through an assignment. And if I needed to go back and restore, so let's talk about that teacher. Let's say that, oh, I forgot to put that grade in. Let me go back. Let me see what section that is. Do I have the section number here? I'm like, where's my section number at? It's the United States history. I have to look it up in their sections. This is how. All right. So if something did happen, and this teacher came back and said, "Oh, I forgot to put this in. I need to go back so that you can store again." I don't want to restore for the whole school. I want to just go to that teacher. So how would I go and do that? Well, I'm going to get their course number and their section number, and I do not know this one off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to go to the teacher schedule to look it up. So I'm going to go to staff. I'm going to go to this teacher. And I'm going to look at her schedule. So I get the right number. And so that is that U.S. history course. So here's the course number. So I'm going to write down 04103G1000. And it is section number 1. So that's going to be a .1 in how I set this up. So I'm going to restore for this so I can get those exams in for that. So how do I go back and restore that? Well, I would say, okay, what's the bucket that I need to store? And it could be that you might need to store, F1 again too. If it was the end of a semester class and that grade impacted another one. So you would have to think about what all buckets you would need to be. So I'm going to say X1 needs to be restored. I need to use that same date, and here's why it's very, very important that you have that little screenshot of what you did here, because it might be 3 days later that they ask you to do this. It is going to be this additional filter, so I can say requested grades are stored for a specific section. Now notice it says course dot section. So for this course dot section, I can come over here and go, all right, let me grab this course number, put this in here, and then put .1. It's not dash. Sometimes we have to enter dashes and sometimes we have to enter dots. So make sure you look at parentheses at how to do it. So requested grades be stored only for a specific section. This is for a year-long class. It's going to store with no credit. This is also where, let's say that you stored an F1 with no credit and you forgot to do it with credit. You absolutely can come back and restore it again and choose the with credit, and it will just overwrite what you put in there and this time award the credit to it. So you can do this. Now, if you want us to hold your hand while you do it to make sure you're not doing anything to duplicate, we can absolutely do that as well. Let me go back to this saying just this school only, make sure I have everything like I did earlier. So I'm going to store for just this one class. And when I hit submit, you're going to see it in the number of grades that it shows right here. So see, it says just 29 students processed. So only the kiddos that were in that class got these grades. And it said 26 grades were updated. Now you're thinking, Stacey, how did 26 of them get updated when only one kid had a grade in there and you just put a grade on everybody else? Well, because even when I stored the first time, because it was expecting to see a bucket and it didn't, it did store something in the database. It stored a null record. We know we don't like nulls and we have to go take them out. So because it stored that null, it is now overriding the null with a grade. And so that's why it says they were updated instead of they were inserted. So that's how you could go through and do it for one section if you needed to. Also, just FYI, if that term had been locked at this point, you could manually, if you had rights to unlock that section, you would need to unlock it, hit the unlock, say unlock it until, let's see, what is today? The 4th. So you have to pick the next day, hit submit. That does this little lock where it says, oop, the bucket, it is unlocked. The teacher goes in, makes their changes, and you're like, I don't want to leave that thing open for 24 hours. So you would say, hey, teacher, call and tell me when you have finished because I'm going to go lock it back. Because just like you unlocked it here, you can come back to this and choose to lock the selected sections and lock it until, whenever you wanted to. You could pretend that it's the 19th or whatever. I'm just going to say lock it till the 5th. But you would lock it until whenever you want to. And then once we get into the next quarter, that whole lock and unlock would take effect on there. So you would lock it to the end of the year or whatever you wanted to. And it'll be locked. So you could lock and unlock just like this within a moment's notice and not have to wait on that timing of that calendar like you would think. I don't know if anyone asked, but if a student is marked exempt, it stores X1 or X2 as a null. We do not use those in calculations, so I usually do not delete them. That is okay to leave those nulls. Is not there. Yeah, if they're not being used in GPA or honor roll, nulls are fine to have. But let me tell you why you're getting a null instead of a grade, Daniel. When you're in the teacher grade book, because I'm going to assume that y'all have a grade scale that has those special codes inside of there. What you really want to tell your folks to do is not use that exempt symbol. Oh yeah, I just locked this, so let me go unlock this. Unlock. Yep, unlock it till tomorrow. Submit. Okay, let me go back to the teacher. Or refresh. Okay, so when you are on your kids' all reporting terms, whether it's assignment or the reporting terms, when they're in this grade, if they are using this exempt button right here, that is why you are getting nulls. That is a flag. It is not a grade. They have to use the codes that is that X code that we used that actually makes it turn into this, as opposed to using this right here, and it will actually store this in as the grade instead of a null. So you'll get the grade X, the percent 100, which ain't really gonna do anything anyway. So just keep in mind, if they're using this exempt, this is why you're getting a null. If they use the code that you use for exempt, it will not store a null, and you don't have to worry about that. Now, just like with the other things, no, because it's marked as an exempt grade over in the actual stored grades, grade scale setup for it, Daniel. Because in all honesty, y'all do know what happens when you exempt these grades anyway, mathematically. It does take whatever percent that it was supposed to be and kind of splits it as it giving it to them anyway. The maths. Is there a way to store grades for an individual student? Absolutely. Because let's take the little kiddo that I just did that exemption on. What was her name? Ava George. So let's say, oh, I fixed Ava George's grades. So I save. And I need to restore just for Ava. Well, what I would need to do is first make Ava my student selection. Oh no, not you're still fine, Daniel. It's just one of those little bugs of do you want to see the null there or not? What you're doing is not bad at all. You're fine in how you're doing it. It's just half a dozen of one, 6 of the other. So I'm going to look up George. There's Ava. So I'm going to make her my student selection. And Casey, this will also be something that you'll want to do. Like if you have the kid that's withdrawing a week before the end of the semester, and you know that they're going to another district, and you want to go ahead and give them. Look, we love our 12 tech folks. I'm a 12 tech folk. We don't confuse them. If you want to go ahead and store for them, knowing that they're going to leave and their grades are finished anyway, or you want to finish them at wherever they're at so that something will transfer to the next district, this is how you can go and do that. So once you have that student selected, then you would go to your store grade screen. And I'm going to say, oh, I need to store, and for this case, let's just use X1, but maybe I needed to go through and store, Q2 and X1 and F1 or whatever it is for this kiddo. I'm going to choose those same parameters. That's going to be the important thing. And then down here, you see where you get this checkbox that says store grades for the currently selected student. So because I only have her selected, it will do just for her. Now I could select 3 kids. Maybe there's 3 kids' grades who were updated. I can make all 3 of those my student selection and do it for that one. So in this case, it's that year-long class. So I can say store with no credit. Change it to this school. So I'm pretty much setting the page as if I were doing it for the entire school, but I'm doing it for this one kiddo right here. So that when I hit submit, one student process, 2 stored grades were updated. So why were 2 stored grades updated? That's a good question. Let me think about that. So it did the X1, and the X1, if it impacted something else, would have gone through that as well. So let's go look at Miss George. So if I look now, and here's that difference, Daniel, instead of seeing a null, I see that X in there. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, you're fine. And there's my grade. Because you see how this is marked to exclude from GPA calculations because it's set that way as an excluded to not be counted. Will it store for multiple classes? Yes, it will. So like if I needed to store just Q2 for her, it would then realistically probably don't have any grades in here for, but we'll go through the process. If I say store for that one kiddo, and I need and maybe she's got Q2 grades in every one of these classes, store with no credit, store with no credit, because maybe she's got some year-long classes and semester classes, and maybe she's got a quarter class. I would say store with no credit. So I want to get Q2 for any class that she has in any one of these terms. I would hit submit, and it'll tell you. So she's got 4 classes. It updated because this is a block schedule. She updated all 4 of her classes. So yes, it will absolutely store for more. Oh, I can show you right quick, Daniel. So when you are in, well, I could have just done it from here. School management, I shouldn't have hit that. School management, academics, and inside of, oh, I got to be at the district office. It's in your grade scale setup. Academic grade scales. You'll want to make sure that whatever grade scale you are using, so in my case, I'm using a 100 point, that you have that it is tagged to use a special codes. And then you'll want to make sure that you have a special codes right here, grade scale setup. There's a default one in everybody's where you set. So see, like right here, I've got the special code X for exempt that I'm saying can be used as a final grade. You have to give it you have to give these present values. They're not going to do anything, but it does not include in GPA, so it's not going to count toward anything. It's not going to be in points, grad credit, nothing. But I can use it as a final score, and it is exempt, so it does not get counted toward any grade in there because you're exempting it here. So that way you can get codes with no mathematical repercussions. You'll also want to do the standard cleanup that you do, afterward. Check for null grades. You really want to delete those out if it's a bucket that's being used for honor roll, so like your quarter grades, things such as that. You'll want to delete those out. Or remember, we have all those directions linked on that data, our data calendar. So if I go to my Google site again, right here in the center is our SIS data calendar. So if I scroll down to December, scrolling, it's going to talk about storing grades for 9 weeks. Check for and remove null grades. This will take you to a video on how to do that. And then all these different reports. So, review that. Did you get any duplicates? Did you happen to go in and store anything twice and not realize it and you've got duplicate grades? There is no way to clean those automatically because PowerSchool doesn't know which one's wrong and which one's right. You just need to look at the list and whichever one is wrong, delete it out. Do you have out of sync grades? In other words, is there something in the grade book that is different from what you stored? If you have locked your grade books before you store it, that should not happen. Look for any missing grades. You can go through to see, is there a teacher that did not put a grade in on a kid, and you can go find out why. So those will be all the things that you'd want to run after the fact. Run your honor roll, recalculate your class rank after you do this so that you can get an updated class rank, and do all the other fun stuff that you need to do after there. But that's really what you want to look at, looking at this diagram here to make sure that you get the right buckets to know, are you awarding credit at those high school levels for those classes, and making sure you get all those in there. One more question. If I hand enter transcript credits to a transfer student's historical grades, will storing grades erase those entries? No, ma'am. Because storing grades goes to the teacher grade book and puts on top of stored grades. It's going to manually match those sections and numbers and will only override anything that came from that teacher grade book. Anything that was hand entered, it does not touch those. Everything stays very mutually exclusive inside of those historical grade tables, which is what makes it easy to do this. Absolutely perfect. Any other questions from anyone? And we'll have this recording out there so that y'all can go back and look at it when y'all just store in January. Because like I said, I know most of y'all told me y'all are storing your first semester after you get back from winter break. Yeah, permissions can be a tricky thing because it is hidden. When they did the transfer from the old UI to the new UI, stored grades used to be on this like random page. Well, that page still exists. There's just not a link to it. And the people who need stored grades still have to have permissions to that hidden page in their overridden page permissions to be able to get to it, even if you've turned it on in that configure page permissions for all groups. So, yeah. Sherry, a student arrived before Thanksgiving and the grades for Q2 from the previous school were stored. Okay. School from another district. What will happen when we store grades after Christmas break? Will it calculate these grades with the grades in our district? No, ma'am, it will not. Because the calculation of grades, like those formulas, all are over in Power Teacher Pro. They do not work with what might have come in historical grades. What will happen is when you store, it's going to get another line for that grade. So you've got the grade from the other school that came in, and you've got your grade. If you are expecting it to be configured in to get an overall Q2, you need to make sure that you've given that grade to the teacher, and y'all have some kind of, rule that you're telling them to do. I have seen districts where they're like, you figure out, they were with them for 3 weeks, they were with us for 6 weeks, so it's a this percentage split to hand calculate that final average. Or they will like start them out with that average, and then anything that they've done since then will factor in with it. They put that average in for like every assignment that they've done since then. Every district has their own policy, so whatever policy you have, so that you get an updated Q2 grade from your school, and then you post it there. Now, if you are expecting that Q2 from the other district to not count anything, you probably need to go to that kid's stored grade record and turn all this stuff off. Say exclude it from everything. You might want record that it came in from the other district, but you don't want to use it for anything, for honor roll, for class rank, for GPA, things like that. Does that make sense for you, Sherry? Perfect. Keeping it solo, Daniel. Keeping it solo. Yeah, that transfer of grades is kind of the biggest pain point that we have, because even though those grades come in automatically over the admin side in our transfer process with the state, they don't automatically go in the teacher portal, but all of the formulas that are used to calculate those residual grades, so like a Q2 is used to get a final grade, those are all over Empower Teacher. That grade has to be manually given to the teacher to be put in there so that it can then do its calculations the way that it needs to. Hey, I love hearing that you do have a grade change form in your log entries to get clarification of that. And notice down here, this change history, it does tell you every time a grade has been updated by stored grades, but anything that's manually changed or within here, you can also see from those as well, what was stored, what is there, what was changed. So that was my first store, everything that it did, and then what was changed after the fact. So grade history is great. Any other questions from anyone? Remember, as you get into the process, if you need any help, you can always reach out to me or reach out to one of the Power School coaches, because it is daunting for the first time that you store grades. It's everybody's like, because I need grades to be right, but y'all, everything can be fixed. Even if it's stored wrong, it can be fixed. Sometimes it takes a little more work. Sometimes it's a little manual, but we can always fix anything that's done incorrectly, and we can help you find those mistakes. It's absolutely okay. We are a team and we are stronger together. All right, I will stop the recording.